So welcome to this workshop. We're going to be talking about how to spot a fad diet. There's so many out there and sometimes they're so sneaky, you just don't know when it is a fad diet or whether it's something that you can truly believe. Now, hopefully you've come across back to basics and you realize that that is all about lifelong habits and how you can really, if you stick to things in the long term, that, you'll see changes, whereas a fad diet is great. You're going to lose weight really quickly for a really short amount of time, but you're probably going to gain it back again. Hi, Simone. Right, this is where it could all go wrong. So I'm going to share my screen. Can I just get some nods that you can see that? Perfect. We're already off to a good start. Brilliant. Let me see my watch so I do stick to time because I'm a bit of a waffler sometimes. So how to spot a fad diet. Firstly, we need to know what a fad diet is. A fad diet is any plan or diet or something along the lines of that that promotes results that cause really fast and rapid weight loss, but there's no scientific evidence to actually support its claim. So these diets are super popular because you get those rapid results that you want to see, whether it's lose 10 pounds in a week, for example. It's something really extreme and it's really wrong that it's promoted, but unfortunately they're just super popular because of it's glamorous, isn't it? 10-pound weight loss in a week, that's so glamorous compared to 10 pounds over a couple of months. And ultimately they're just promising really extreme results. Chances are 80% of people actually won't achieve because they can't sustain this for a really long time. So I've got a few images here of different kinds of diets. So I've got one that's pointing to the detox diet, the keto diet. This little caveman points to the paleo diet. And then this is kind of weight loss products. And I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail in a minute. But firstly, let's talk about how weight loss works. I'm sure you know it's all about energy balance, and energy balance is a large part of it. If we have a negative energy balance, then we're going to suffer, not suffer with. It's 7 o'clock and I'm losing my words. We're going to experience weight loss, and ultimately energy expenditure is greater than the energy we're putting into us, so we're going to lose some weight. On the other hand, we can gain weight if our energy in exceeds the amount of energy we're putting out. However, whilst it is mostly about energy balance, there are other factors involved as well. I didn't want to put the diagram up because it's very confusing, but there is a diagram that literally looks like someone has just drawn lots of squiggly lines over connecting all the different factors of weight loss. And they include things like your sleep. So if you're having poor sleep, you're actually making it more difficult to lose weight. Stress, if you're stressed, it may affect kind of your emotions, and that in turn can affect weight loss. If you get very stressed, or you're going through a divorce, it's a really sad time or something like that, might encourage emotional eating. And your genetics, there's actually a gene that if you have this gene, if it's switched on, you're more likely to kind of be overweight or obese. It doesn't mean that you're definitely going to be overweight or obese. It just means that you've got a greater chance than someone else who doesn't necessarily have that gene switched on. Now, the safe rate of weight loss, according to the NHS and the government, is 0.5 to 1 kilograms a week. It's really, when you look at that number, it's quite disappointing compared to a program that might promise you can lose a couple of kilograms in a week. But this rate is really important because it's safe. You're going to be able to get enough energy to continue your daily activities. You're going to get enough micronutrients, so you're not going to be really fatigued. You're not going to get some illnesses. It's really important that you do follow this kind of safe rate of weight loss because we just don't want anyone to become malnourished. Now, moving on from kind of how does weight loss work? Firstly, how do we know a fad diet is a fad diet? Now, this is a checklist that I love to use. And after this workshop, tomorrow you're going to receive a email that has kind of a nice summary sheet in. And in it, we've got this checklist so you can use it in the future to compare things. But essentially, if any diet plan meets at least one of these, it's a fad diet. So firstly, is it promising a quick fix? As I've mentioned, lifelong habits are the only way to long-term success. And of course, if you're doing something really extreme and you're in an energy deficit somehow, you're going to lose the weight, and you can lose it pretty quickly. Because if you put yourself into a greater energy deficit, of course, you're going to lose the weight compared to a smaller energy deficit. The question is it sustainable in the long term? It promises significant weight loss. Again, it's likely going to be exceeding this. And my best example would be something like 10 pounds in a week. Realistically, someone cannot safely lose that amount of weight in a week without suffering some kind of consequence, whether that's to their mental health and their relationship with food, or whether that's a physical problem and it's causing a deficiency of some sort. Because to lose 10 pounds in a week, you are having to really not eat very much at all. Does the diet require you to purchase their products? To me, any diet that's requiring you to purchase products just sounds like a way to earn money, to be honest. Their products are probably really pricey as well. And the best ones I can think of are the Atkins diet, which I'm going to talk about, but also like the Cambridge One-to-One diet. These are kind of more individual programs. You have to get an advisor, for example, but you can also pop to kind of drugstores and you can get things like Slim Fast. I'm sure all the stores have their own versions as well. So anything that has a product is a fad diet, most likely. Does this diet promote the restriction of an entire food group? Each food group, so take carbohydrates, for example, have such an important and key function in our diet. We absolutely need them. And I've got lots of different videos under Know Your Nutrients covering why we need carbohydrates, why we need fats, why we need proteins, and just different foods. It's so important that we're not restricting an entire food group, because take carbohydrates, for example. Carbohydrates are broken down into glucose and our brain runs on glucose. So if we're not giving our body enough carbohydrates, for example, our body's having to go through a really lengthy process to be able to get energy, when it'd be so much easier just to eat some bread essentially and not exclude it. And again, this kind of links on to, does the diet kind of promote you to only eat one type of food? And the best example of this I can think of is the cabbage soup diet. It doesn't even sound appealing, but I'm sure many people have tried it. And ultimately, if you're only eating one type of food, you're going to end up with a nutrition deficiency somehow, because there's no food out there that can deliver all the nutrients you need. It's just not possible, because it will always be missing one nutrient, whether that's a macronutrient, so carbs, protein or fats, or whether it's a micronutrient. Even missing just one micronutrient can cause a whole kind of cascade of effects. Is it promoting extreme energy restriction? Is it saying you can only eat 500 calories a day? Because, a toddler needs at least 1,200 calories a day. So by no means should you really be eating any less than that, unless you have medical supervision from kind of a health professional. I'm talking you're going to the hospital and getting medical supervision, not just someone, who you rung up because you've seen an advert and they can give you medical supervision. Is the diet so rigid there is no flexibility? When you're going to celebration events, so take the bank holiday we've just had, or a wedding, you have to stay on that diet. You can't go off of it at all, because no diet should mean that you have to sit and eat, set a set food or a set meal, and you just can't go off tangent, because at the end of the day, food is to be enjoyed. And if you can't enjoy food, it's not the right diet to do. Does the diet claim that you need to detox? Detoxing is absolutely not necessary, and I'm going to explain it in a little bit more detail in a bit, but our body can detox itself, so there's no need to spend lots of money on any detox juices or products, for example. Your body can do it all itself. And finally, is it based on a secret? Now, if there were a secret, I wouldn't have gone to university and studied for many years. Nigel wouldn't have been a dietitian for many years or gone to university. Dietitians, nutritionists, we wouldn't exist, because we'd all know the secret, and no one would be suffering with kind of overweight or obesity, and no one would need to lose weight, because the secret's out there. We'd all know what to do. So these are the key things to always look out for. And sitting here now, I don't know if you're kind of thinking, oh, okay, yeah, I definitely know some diets that are meeting this. And maybe you've done them before, maybe you haven't. But now we're just going to go through a few of the different diets and just break them down a little bit. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the paleo diet. And this is based basically on kind of the hunter-gatherer times, so about 10,000 to 2.5 million years ago, a really wide kind of time period. And essentially it's based on eating lots of lean meats, in particular grass-fed ones, fish, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. So essentially, you're kind of limiting processed foods, and you're also limiting kind of our carbohydrates, essentially. So we're limiting legumes, which are carbohydrates, potatoes, and grains, which are our carbohydrates too. And it's also limiting dairy, which is super important. And I mean, that's a positive of this diet is it's limiting our processed foods, which are often high in fat, salt, and sugar. So there's a benefit there. But there's absolutely no need to limit dairy or legumes, potatoes, grains, unless you just can't tolerate them. Some people have a dairy intolerance. So sure, don't eat something that you can't eat. But dairy provides us with calcium, and calcium is super important in menopause for our bone health. We all know that we're at increased risk of osteoporosis. So really important that we can get calcium in. And then legumes, potatoes, and grains provide us with some of our most important B vitamins, which are really important for our metabolism. And sure, we can get all of the nutrients we get in these foods from other places, but we can also get them from here. And if you have no reason not to eat them, eat them. But essentially, the reason it's saying this diet says to eat these foods and not these foods is it suggests that our diet has evolved much quicker than our body has. And so in turn, we can't quite process and digest these foods. And I don't quite, believe in the science behind this. And ultimately, you may end up experiencing nutritional deficiencies because, for example, if you're relying a lot on dairy for calcium, or if you suddenly cut that out and you don't know what to put back into your diet for calcium, you're going to end up with a calcium deficiency, and then you're going to be at an increased risk of osteoporosis, which is already happening in menopause. But also, you're really going to struggle to enjoy food in social situations. So I've mentioned celebration events, a wedding, for example. You can't just go out with friends and enjoy a meal because you've got to make sure it's probably going to meet this criteria. And the chances are a meal is going to contain at least one of these. So ultimately, this is a fad diet because it's promoting the restriction of starchy carbohydrates. And essentially, it's ignoring the health benefits of the foods such as dairy and grains. And things like whole grains, so take oats and wholemeal bread, they're heart friendly, they're really good for your heart. So again, excluding these foods just isn't going to be good for you. And again, at menopause, we have an increased risk of kind of developing heart disease. So it's important that we can include these foods in our diet. And ultimately, anyone who goes on this diet and says it's been great for weight loss, chances are they've just entered an energy deficit by removing a food group, which is starchy carbohydrates. So don't think it's the magic of removing dairy, legumes, potatoes, and grains. It's actually just creating an energy deficit by removing a whole food group. The next diet I want to talk about is the keto diet. Keto diet is very, very well known. And this is all about having a really low carbohydrate intake, less than 50 grams a day, which really isn't very much. And the amount of carbohydrates we should have, just for comparison, is roughly 270 grams for women each day. And the keto diet is saying have no more than 50 grams. And that actually leaves you very little room to even have fruits and vegetables, which we all know are so important for us. So barely any carbohydrates. You can have moderate amounts of protein, but this diet is all about eating fat. And essentially, the way this works is it's saying by not having carbohydrates, our body will run out eventually of glucose, which I've already mentioned the brain runs on. So if we don't have glucose, our body then has to do something else to be able to get energy. We can't function without energy. And it's really important that our brain has energy to be able to control our body. So what happens is our body will enter a state of ketosis, and this is when our body will use fatty acids to produce something called ketone bodies. And these ketone bodies are able to cross into the brain. So there's not many molecules that can cross into the brain, but ketone bodies are one of them, just like glucose can get into our brain. And so ketone bodies will, as a result, kind of be used in place of glucose. So, I mean, it does work. The ketone bodies are, efficient in some state. They can provide a bit more energy than glucose, but you're putting your body through a whole load of hassle when you could just eat carbohydrates and get energy that way. And actually, a lot of people who will go on a keto diet will start to experience something called keto flu. And this is quite a short-term thing, but it can cause things from nausea, headaches, feeling tired, bit dizzy, you can struggle to sleep, and you can get constipation from the lack of fiber from carbohydrates. When I was studying at university, we did a practical where people had to go on the keto diet for 3 days. And just in 3 days, people were starting to experience the keto flu and they felt terrible. And they were really, really excited when our practical was over and they could just go and eat a load of carbohydrates afterwards. So there's not only short-term effects from the keto diet, but there's also long-term effects, and that includes kidney stones, you can get fatty liver, your protein levels in your body can also be reduced as well. So many negatives of this. And really, in terms of the weight loss that occurs with this, a lot of it will probably be due to water weight. Have I done my slides in the right order? I'll go back in a second. So water weight. Basically, when we experience really rapid weight loss, probably from a diet like the keto diet or another fad diet, chances are you're losing weight really quickly because of water. Now, carbohydrates in our body are stored as something called glycogen, but glycogen has to be stored alongside water. And this is because when we need to break down the glycogen to get the glucose that our body runs off, we need water for that process. So it's really handy that our body decides to store that water with it. But when we're not eating carbohydrates, essentially glycogen isn't formed because there's nothing to form the glycogen. And as a result, water just isn't stored. And if we're doing something like the keto diet where we're not eating carbohydrates, well, our body will use up its store of glycogen. And once that's depleted, it will also have used up all the water to be able to break that glycogen down. And as a result, you're just going to have less water stored. And so you will get a reduction in water weight. And as a result, if you step on the scales, you'll probably see a drop in the number on the scales just because you've lost water. So sometimes it isn't actually fat loss because you haven't really entered an energy deficit that quickly. Sometimes it is just the way our body is storing different molecules. So going back, the keto diet is definitely a fad diet because it's promoting the restriction of an entire food group, in particular carbohydrates. And actually, just thinking about carbohydrates overall, if carbohydrates were the key problem to kind of people having excess weight, well, I would like you to question this essentially. Japan has one of the lowest obesity rates in the world, yet they have one of the highest rates of carbohydrate consumption. So surely if carbohydrates were causing us to gain weight, you know, Japan would have probably the highest levels of obesity, but that's just not the case. And it will be down to a case of energy balance. So the Atkins diet moves on nicely from the keto diet. The Atkins diet is very similar to the keto diet, and I think it's essentially just a branded version of the keto diet. So it's a low carb diet, depending on what plan you have, because they have multiple plans. The Atkins diet looks very complicated for my liking. Some of them allow you to have more carbohydrates than other plans, while some make you have even less than the keto diet. I've got it written down here. So if you are on one particular Atkins diet, I found that on phase 1, you could have 20 grams of carbohydrates. I dread to know how few fruits and vegetables you can get in there, definitely not your 5 a day. By phase 2, you could eat 25 to 30 grams of carbohydrates. And by phase 3, you could have 40 grams of carbohydrates. Now, thinking back, adult women should be having around 270 grams of carbohydrates, while the Atkins diet and the keto diet really just aren't getting you to those levels. And somewhere along the line, if you're not getting kind of your nutrients, your micronutrients that you were getting from your carbs somewhere else, you're going to end up with a micronutrient deficiency, sure. So again, we can have moderate amounts of protein, and it's a high fat diet. And as it says here, as you lose more weight, you can increase your carbohydrate intake. But essentially, this diet is just demonizing carbs. And the closer you get to your target weight, you can eat more carbohydrates. So to me, that suggests that they're even identifying that carbohydrates aren't the issue, because as you get back towards your target weight, you can eat them. So it's all very confusing how they work. And essentially, they're just creating an energy deficit by removing a food group. And my question when it comes to the Atkins diet, the keto diet, any low carb diet is, if you enjoy carbohydrates, you enjoy eating bread, you enjoy pasta, rice, porridge, breakfast cereals, anything like that, if you enjoy it, eat it, because if you don't eat it, you're just going to sit and think about it. And at some point you're going to binge in them and you're going to feel really guilty. And actually, if you let yourself enjoy those foods in moderation, you'll be able to form an even better relationship with food. And the Atkins diet, I don't know if I've got a picture on the next slide, let me check. Nope, but it brings up my point. The Atkins diet promotes the use of their products. So when I had a look on their website, they had no end of products you could buy. And most of the time they had products to kind of mimic sweet food. So I think they had brownies, for example, but it wasn't just, like a typical brownie. It was a brownie that was replacing the sugar with sweetener. Now, I have no problem with people eating sweeteners. I will eat sweeteners. I think in moderation, everything is fine. But they're essentially not teaching you to have a very good relationship with your food, in the sense of they're not teaching you how to have the real thing in moderation. Instead, here's our lower sugar, lower calorie version that you can probably have more of, instead of just learning that, you can have a brownie, for example, enjoy it, and then you can move on. So this is definitely a fad diet because it's promoting the restriction of carbohydrates, and it's promoting you to buy their products essentially, and they're pricey products, they're not cheap. And I found this very interesting. This was on the Atkins website when you were comparing different diets. And it said that a classic keto diet is very strict and that medical supervision is recommended. Yet, as I've already mentioned, the Atkins diet is actually more stricter in my opinion, because you can have even less carbohydrates. So I just found it very interesting that they were saying this. And essentially, I think the reason they were saying this is because if you go on the Atkins diet, you kind of have to buy their products. But if you go on the keto diet, nobody owns the keto diet. It's not trademarked, whereas the Atkins diet, it's a brand. So they can just get your money in that sense. And this is what I mean about, companies selling these products and just being in it for the money. They come across as if they really care for you and for your kind of weight loss journey, for example. But at the end of the day, they are just trying to earn money from you. Detox diets. Detox diets are always a very interesting one because there are a billion different claims. These diets kind of originate from the suggestion that we need to cleanse our body from toxins, particularly after periods of indulgence. So the best one I can think of is Christmas. Maybe you've just had a big birthday and you've had lots of wine, lots of cake, for example. Supposedly after that, people think you should cleanse your body from kind of all the foods you enjoy, but it's really not the case. Now, some of the claims that are made, you can see just here. So the first one is weight loss, probably at really unsafe rates, just because half the time these detox diets are something like lemon juice with a bit of maple syrup, and you've got to drink that so many times a day. Perhaps it's a detox tea or a detox juice where you literally can only drink juice all day. That is going to put you in such an extreme calorie deficit that no wonder you're losing so much weight. Some of them will claim that it helps with digestion. Arguably, if you're drinking just juice, there's not much to digest. Some people will claim that giving your digestive system a break will help. But again, there's just not enough solid research behind all of these. Claims that it will improve your appearance. Now, some of this may come from if you're having a juice cleanse, for example, you're going to be getting lots of micronutrients in there. So things like selenium, for example, and vitamin E are really good for your skin health. So sure, if you're getting the micronutrients in to help your skin, you're going to see improvements, but equally you can get that from having a healthy, balanced diet too. There's claims that it will boost your energy levels. Really debatable on this one, because if you're not eating enough kind of calories, enough energy, you're going to feel really tired. And chances are, not chances are even, detox diets are typically recommended probably for about 2 weeks maximum, just because even the people who sell these products know it's not sustainable to stay on this for such a long time. Claims that it can boost your immune system. If you ever see anybody, including health professionals, saying that you can boost your immune system, that is a really big red flag. You cannot boost your immune system. If you boosted your immune system, it actually wouldn't be very good for your body. You can support your immune system, but you can never boost it, and nor would you want to, because your immune system would start kind of attacking itself in some sense. And then finally, there's claims that it can even reduce cellulite. Now, there's nothing wrong with cellulite. It's just the way kind of fat is stored around the body. And again, a detox diet can't do that. Once you have cellulite, unfortunately, you know, it's not something that we can reverse. Sorry, I'm having a few problems with the box on Zoom. Great. So this is such a long list of why detox diets are a fad diet. If we look on our criteria list, you're restricting entire food groups because chances are you're just eating fruits and vegetables. And fruits and veg are great, but we can't get all our nutrients from them. It promises a really quick fix, promising significant weight loss. You can only eat one food. There's extreme energy restriction. You've probably got to buy their products. And again, juice cleansers are extremely pricey. Some of them can become like £200 just for a week. And that's not even, if you think about it, you could do a £200 shop for your whole family for probably more than a week, or for a week. It, you know, depends on prices at the moment, really. It's such a rigid diet. You've got to just be having those juices, for example. And then the really obvious one is claiming that you need to detox, and that's really not the case at all. So with detox diets, we really need to be cautious of ones that include periods of fasting. There's a lot of debate around whether fasting, particularly intermittent fasting, is good for us or not. My opinion is fasting is no magical cure. If fasting was the answer to weight loss, again, it would be something that we'd all know. Everyone would be recommended to do it, but it's really not. You know, eat when you're hungry, don't eat when you're not hungry. As I've mentioned, consumption of only fruits and vegetables, as I've said, you can get a lot of nutrients from there, but there will always be nutrients missing, and it's always important that we're getting every single nutrient. A lot of the time, these diets are eliminating foods such as wheat and dairy, and whilst it can help to eliminate these foods if you have an intolerance to them, they're very common intolerances, we're going to miss key nutrients again. Even things like wheat, if we think about white flour, so our white bread, for example, it's fortified with calcium. It's actually a really big part of the calcium in our diet. So if you suddenly start excluding kind of bread and pasta, you're going to start missing out on some of your calcium, as we've mentioned, really important for bone health. You're limiting your food intake to a really small specific group of foods. So again, this kind of links back to the fruit and vegetables. Avoid caffeine and alcohol. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not bad if you don't want to have caffeine and alcohol, but it is down to personal preference. Obviously, when it comes to caffeine and alcohol, everything in moderation. If you want to know more about caffeine, I think 2 weeks ago, I did a video under Know Your Nutrients for that, where I broke that down a little bit more. And finally, detox products. So here I've got some juices. This one was definitely around £150. For I think it was 7 days, like I said. And then we've got this detox tea. It's really common. You can literally buy them in so many drugstores nowadays. And most of them, like these detox teas, are just causing a laxative effect. So it's really not that healthy for your body. So overall, detox diets are just a big no. And the reason they're a big no is because our organ contains this wonderful organ that's working away all the time for us, and that's the liver. The liver is constantly detoxing us in some sense and removing toxins and keeping us nice and healthy. So as a result, a health professional would never, ever recommend a detox diet. If you go to a nutritionist, a dietitian, a doctor, and they start recommending you go on a detox diet, literally leave that room, because it's just not safe. And whatever they're saying, they're not using evidence. There's not enough evidence to say that we need detox diets. And I've definitely never come across one who would recommend it. And in terms of how the liver detoxes us, well, the liver receives blood from the gut. And in this blood, there'll be different nutrients, there'll be toxins, and cells in our liver are able to kind of filter through this, and it will filter nutrients to where they're needed, and it will remove toxins, and the toxins are actually removed when we go to the toilet. So our body has a whole system that's going all the time. So don't worry that if you're not on a juice cleanse or a detox diet, having a detox tea, that your toxin levels are just building up. Your liver is working away, helping you to remove them. Some people will claim that they feel really good on a detox diet, and that is brilliant. You know, anything that makes you feel good, good is good. But let's question, actually, are you no longer smoking if you were smoking before? Because some of these diets tell you to stop. Are you suddenly drinking less alcohol? That's bound to make you feel better. Has your diet in some way improved? So perhaps you were missing a load of micronutrients that you weren't having before because perhaps you were having lots of processed foods. Are you sleeping more? And are you moving more? All these different things are going to make you feel great. But at the end of the day, a detox diet just can't be sustained. And therefore, it's really why you should stay away from it. PowerPoint slow down. There we go. And in fact, I first created this when social distancing was around, and I was telling everyone to social distance from it. And that really doesn't change now. Just stay away from detox diets. They're not worth the time at all. Slimming clubs and points. Now, whether this is classed as a fad diet is very debatable. But I just wanted to cover some of the points where, to me, it kind of fits in with the fad diet kind of ream. I'm sure some of you here may have joined some slimming clubs. I'm not going to name any names because we all know the slimming clubs that are out there. Now, starting with the positives, these can be a good place to start building healthier habits. Some studies have shown that people who have joined these kind of clubs have walked away and they've got much better habits. However, they have very questionable terminology, using things such as points and sins. We shouldn't be thinking of food in negative terms, and using the term sin is definitely going to make you kind of question that food a lot. The words we use around food is super important, and also their system is questionable. You can eat an avocado, for example, and it's sinned in the exact same way that a bit of cake or a bit of chocolate would be, even though the nutrients you're getting from both of them are completely different. It's the same with bananas. You could eat a whole banana and that's absolutely fine. The second you mash it, it's going to have points added to it. And then I understand the process behind that, because if we mash a banana, we're releasing the sugar from the cells. And so when we eat that, the sugar is going to kind of be released into our body much quicker than a banana where we've had to chew it ourselves. But my question is, who is eating a lot of mashed bananas that, you've got to start sinning them or giving them points, for example? And ultimately, the points and the point system doesn't really consider the different kind of nutritional quality. All calories are equal. And as I've mentioned, avocado and chocolate both contain fat, for example, but they contain different types of fat. Avocados contain really good for us fats, whereas chocolate contains a bit more saturated fat. And again, whilst I've said it can promote healthy behaviors, sometimes it can promote really unhealthy behaviors. A lot of people will, a couple of days before their weigh day, will start restricting what they eat. They won't drink water. They'll wear really light clothes just before they get weighed. As soon as they get weighed, they'll then be really hungry because they've restricted themselves, and they'll go off and they'll probably overeat. And really, is that number that you're therefore seeing on the scales reflective of kind of where you are in your weight loss journey? Probably not, because you're constantly going through that fluctuation of the days before you're really restricting and then you're binging afterwards. So just things to consider. I don't think I put, no. So branded products kind of linked to slimming clubs because some of them do have their own products. Really, when it comes to branded products, I think they're just sending you into a very expensive energy deficit. I worked with a client who was on the Cambridge 1-to-1 diet. She spent the same amount she spent on a weekly shop for just a few days or a week's worth of food, and she barely got any food. She was absolutely miserable on it because she didn't get to eat very much, and she just really didn't enjoy it. Again, with these kind of branded product diets, can you literally only consume their products? Are you allowed the freedom of having your own meal that you can enjoy, or is it a case that you just have to eat their bars or their powders? Are these kind of diets teaching you better dietary habits? It's all good having products there ready for you to eat, and that you can eat 3 of those products and you'll be within your calorie deficit. But as soon as you start that, as soon as you stop that diet, even, are you going to know where to start with your eating? Chances are you're not. You're just going to go back to what you were doing and you'll regain the weight. And ultimately, the whole point of being able to lose weight is to maintain it and learn those healthier habits. It's fine if it takes you longer to lose weight because it's taken you time to adjust and learn the habits. Just like Back to Basics is doing, we're not expecting to see a dramatic change in anyone's weight in just 12 weeks. We're expecting to see, that slow, gradual progression in learning dietary habits. So this really is a fad diet because chances are you're restricting an entire food group. It's promising a quick fix. It's promising significant weight loss. There's an extreme energy restriction. A lot of the time, these actually can be under 1,000 calories, which, as I've mentioned, just isn't enough for an adult. You've got to purchase their product, and it's a very rigid diet because you've got to stay on their diet. And a lot of the time, these are so low calorie that they're deemed a very low calorie diet, and therefore you should really have that medical supervision that I've mentioned. My PowerPoint is going very slow all of a sudden. Here we go. At the end of the day, if there was a miracle method, we would all know about it. And as I said, I wouldn't be sat here having to tell anyone what to do or to avoid fad diets because they would be the answer to everything. However, there are things we can do, and essentially what we want to do is escape the diet trap. Now, the diet trap is a really vicious cycle, and it's so difficult to get out of it. I think that's you, Simone, saying that. Yeah. It is incredibly difficult to get out because you start off by dieting, you lower your calorie intake, you start exercising more, you feel wonderful, you're making a change to your lifestyle. This is the time where you're going to feel absolutely brilliant. However, chances are you start restricting a little bit too much and you start to kind of get cravings, you're missing foods, and you just can't sustain it because it's not realistic. As a result, you end up overeating, whether that's giving into cravings. Me, for example, if I had to live a life without chocolate, I would not be a happy person. If I had to go a week without chocolate or a day, I'd end up overeating it the next day. You've got to eat the foods you do enjoy. You end up overeating these foods, which means clearly you needed them in your diet in the first place. Food isn't just about our physical health, it's about our emotional health too. Overeating leads to feeling really guilty, when actually, like I said, if we had these foods in moderation, you wouldn't have overeaten them and there would be no guilt. And ultimately, the guilt will lead you back to dieting. Again, you'll be like, this is the time I'm really going to stick to it. You feel good. And the whole cycle begins again. But I'm really hoping that, everyone here has kind of escaped this by joining back to basics. And you've kind of gone from the guilt to here, let's imagine back to basics is, and you've escaped this diet trap for good. And there's ways that you can escape it as well. So something I really like to get people to do is reframe your thinking. There's a lot of black and white thinking around food, and often we label foods as good or bad. And I just don't think these are good labels to use around food because anything in excess is bad for us. If all we ate was broccoli, for example, and a lot of broccoli would be cool, we're going to get enough fiber, which is really good for our gut health, it's going to keep us full. You're going to get lots of micronutrients as well, but you're going to end up missing out on some micronutrients that just isn't in broccoli. And to get enough protein in your diet, I don't even want to know how much broccoli you're going to have to eat. So, even though vegetables are labeled good, in excess, they're bad for us. And again, things like olive oil, they're really good because they contain monounsaturated fats, which is good for our heart health. But still having too much fat is going to cause to kind of excess weight to be stored. Similar things with oily fish, really good for omega-3, and it's really important that we are getting omega-3s in our diet. But having too much oily fish can lead to really high levels of mercury in our bodies, and it's really important that we don't have too much heavy metal in our blood. So at the end of the day, anything in excess isn't good for us. And that's why even these good foods can be bad for us in excess. So just removing these good and bad labels can be really helpful. Something I like to use instead is this food is perhaps more nutritious than this food. Let's say broccoli perhaps is more nutritious than chocolate, but chocolate still has some nutrients in it that we need. It's just kind of changing these labels subtly just to have that better relationship with food. And the second you don't label something as bad, using chocolate again, clearly I'm craving some chocolate. Being able to not label chocolate as bad means you can eat that food without the guilt. And if you can eat that food without the guilt, you're not going to end up in this cycle. So it's just one way to help you get out of that trap. And again, let's just get realistic. If you ate whatever you wanted for one day of the year, that is literally 0.3% of the year. It's not even 1%. And if you ate like whatever you wanted for 2 weeks of the year, That's 3.8% of the year. So you wouldn't have even spent 4% of the year eating differently. It is all about kind of what you do over the long term. Obviously, if you were to eat whatever you wanted for X number of weeks, that number is going to get higher. But please don't worry that if you go on holiday, that's it. You've ruined all your progress. You absolutely haven't. You know, it is such a small percentage of your year. So sometimes just sitting back after we've had an indulgent period and going, okay, I had a great time. I enjoyed all that food. I enjoyed myself. Now I'm going to get back to having some more of those nutritious foods, such as, you know, our fruits and vegetables, some whole grains and some protein. You know, there's nothing wrong with enjoying these foods, and just putting it into perspective can really help. Physical activity, you know, exercising is really, you know, tough. People don't want to do it. It's really tough on days like this. For example, for me, I have literally been sat at this desk for nearly 12 hours. I have barely moved. I've done about 2,500 steps. I'm nowhere near my 10,000 steps, unfortunately. Some days are just like that, but most of the time we want to be getting active. And actually just under 70% of adults met the physical activity guidelines. So there's definitely room for improvement. But why do we need to be active? Why are we always banging on about getting your steps, joining strength classes, and just moving more? Well, moving is just overall so good for our health. It can reduce our risk of cardiovascular disease, so things like heart disease and stroke. It's really good for our bone health, so kind of activities that can have an impact on our bones, such as walking, for example, really good for the bones in your legs, really good for your mental health. I don't know anyone who hasn't, you know, gone outside for a walk or a run and then afterwards not felt kind of proud of themselves, and it's boosted their confidence. It's so, so important for your mental health. It can help with your sleep as well, and making sure you're moving enough. It kind of tires you out a little bit and can just make your sleep that little bit better. And then there's other health conditions. It can help with type 2 diabetes risk, your risk of bowel cancer, breast cancer. It can reduce your risk of early death. It can reduce your risk of suffering with hip fractures and falls when you get a little bit older. It can also reduce your risk of depression and dementia too. So many benefits of exercise. It's really something not to overlook at all. Now, thinking about the guidelines, they can seem very, very scary. And the next slide will break it down into kind of a more approachable manner. But if we looked at what the NHS and the government are recommending, they're saying 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise. So that's things like walking, jogging as well, some cycling, or you could do 75 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise. So that's things like HIIT workouts, for example. You're going to be really out of breath, and they are very intense, hence why you have to do, well, hence why you're recommended half the amount of moderate intensity exercise. It's important that we do strength-based activities at least twice a week. Strength-based activities help to kind of boost our metabolism and also help us to kind of hold on to some of our muscle, which is really important for increasing our metabolism, particularly important in menopause as we are losing muscle mass. It's important to be most active most of the time, and most days, and reducing the length of time we're sat down. So as I've mentioned, I've been sat down all day today, so I've not had a very good day in that sense. But the longer you're sitting down, kind of the worse it is for your health. And equally, you could go to the gym, for example, or do exercise for 1 hour a day. Say you get up at 6 a.m, you do a workout for an hour, and then the rest of that day you're sat down. It's great that you've done an hour of exercise, but actually it would have been more beneficial to potentially take that hour and just break it up throughout your day and just get your body moving. This is the Harley Street at Home way that you could get movement into your kind of lifestyle without kind of looking at these guidelines and thinking, oh my God, what do I do? So you can do your 10,000 steps a day. Really recommend that. That's just such a good way to get moving. And again, breaking that up, whether that's on your lunch break, in the morning, in the evening, walking your dog, seeing friends. I always go on walks with my friends, for example. It's a way we catch up, and it's a way I get active, particularly on days where I am sat down for really long periods of time. I would recommend doing at least one strength-based or resistance-based exercise each week. So that could be a class of Clara on a Monday. So she does a strength-based class. We've got Leslie on a Thursday morning. She again does a strength-based class. Or Caroline, she's also on a Thursday morning and she does a resistance band class. So kind of depending on kind of what suits you best. We've got all these videos on catch up, so you can join them kind of not live if you're not comfortable joining live, or kind of see what they're all about before joining. And I'd also recommend doing some yoga or Pilates. So we've got Carolyn on a Tuesday morning who does Pilates, or we have Annie on a Monday who does yoga, or Louise on a Wednesday evening who does yoga as well. Yoga and Pilates is really good for our core, for our balance, and for our muscles as well. So something not to overlook. Another tip is not to restrict yourself. Don't start skipping meals and missing out on the foods you have enjoyed, because as I've said, if you miss out on the foods you enjoy, take your birthday, for example. If you go, well, I'm not going to have a birthday cake this year because, I'm not going to have my birthday cake this year because I'm dieting, and you're seeing everyone else around you eating that cake, well, you're going to end up feeling like you really want that cake, and you're probably going to end up binging. You'll feel guilty, and you're probably going to hinder your progress, and you'll be stuck in this cycle. And that's why it's really important to enjoy the foods you want, and also not to skip meals, because if you skip a meal, you're going to go into that meal feeling a bit more hungry. And this is exactly why Nigel has said about having planned snacks. You're eating regularly, you're going to stop yourself kind of being too hungry for your next meal. Obviously, it's important to go into your meal hungry, but we don't want to be too hungry that you can literally eat everything in sight. And kind of finally is stop, think, and listen. I think Nigel's spoken about this on Back to Basics actually. For some, we have two types of hunger. We have physical hunger, where we need to eat for energy. And that's kind of the feeling, you know, you can feel it in your stomach when you're hungry. Great. And then we've got hedonic hunger, and hedonic hunger is essentially when we're craving a food. So it's not like physical hunger, you're not actually hungry, you just want that taste. And we all get hedonic hunger, we all just crave a food, and it's absolutely okay from time to time just to eat a food because you want the taste of it. We all do it. But sometimes, you know, we can't let this hedonic hunger kind of take control, because this is where the extra energy can come in. And actually just cutting that out sometimes can make, you know, it can cause that calorie deficit, and it doesn't take much thinking. So the question is to question whether you're actually hungry or not. So this little diagram kind of shows you the process to go through. Perhaps you've had your dinner, you're debating whether you should have another portion or not. So you're still feeling a little bit hungry. Stop, don't have seconds just yet, have a glass of water, go off and do something, and wait 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, go back and think, am I still hungry? If you're still hungry, you're going to feel it. If you're hungry, always eat. It's important that you're not walking around being hungry. I've come across people who say, well, if you're going to lose weight, you've got to be hungry. It's an absolute load of nonsense. Don't listen to them. Of course, if you're not hungry, you don't need to eat, and you can go about your day again. It just takes a little while sometimes for our kind of hunger signals in our bodies to kind of catch up with our brain. And again, sometimes you've just had a really good meal and you want some more of it. So really important that we kind of do this process sometimes. And as I've said, it is absolutely not an overnight miracle to lose weight. It is such a journey and a progression to learn new habits. It's definitely not easy. And to learn a new habit, whether it's just one habit, such as getting your 5 a day in, that's better than nothing. So, you know, just remembering that change isn't going to happen overnight. And I want you to remember, God, this is going to sound a bit cheesy towards the end, but you are worth more than your weight. You know, your weight doesn't define who you are as a person. Your friends, your family aren't going to love you any less just because of the number on the scales or because of the way you look. You know, everyone loves you for you and your personality. And ultimately, you're not going to find happiness by reaching a certain number on the scales again. I think there's often this thought of, okay, if I reach this number, I'm going to feel so happy, I'm going to feel the best I've ever felt. But a lot of people, they'll reach that number and actually it's not good enough for them anymore. They want to weigh even less, or they're not as happy as they thought they were going to be. And so it's just remembering that, you know, happiness doesn't lie at a certain number. And if you want to lose weight, you're definitely capable of it. You know, don't sit around thinking, well, I can't do that because I've tried before. Perhaps you weren't trying the right things and you were on a fad diet and you weren't looking at the lifelong habits you can form. It's so important not to give up and know that you can achieve kind of the things you want to achieve. So that is the end of Death by PowerPoint. Hope that was really useful in terms of being able to identify a fad diet and some tips to take away with you to support kind of any journey that you are on with weight management. Does anyone have any questions? I feel like I rambled and sped through that. So yeah, if you've got any questions, let me know whether you want to talk or whether you want to drop them in the chat box. I'm more than happy to answer any questions at all. Silence. Hopefully that's a good silence, and everyone isn't just sat there going, God, what she just said. But it's been lovely to do this workshop with you all. I love talking about things like this because it's something I'm really passionate about, making sure that people aren't being misled by diet plans that have just been created by someone who sometimes I feel like they just wake up one day and go, I'm going to create this and earn some money off of it, essentially. So thank you for joining me this evening. And hopefully I'll see you about on Harley Street at home, and go and enjoy the rest of your evening.